And with this, we move seamlessly to the first session of the conference, and I welcome to the stage Klaus-Peter Böttger, who was EBLIDA president up to yesterday.
Dear honorable guests, dear colleagues, dear hosts from the National Library, on behalf of EBLIDA, I would also outgoing, but nevertheless, I would like to welcome you to the 2015 EBLIDA-NAPLE conference here in Riga and thank NAPLE and especially Jan Brackmann again for this cooperation. Having the pleasure to be here for the third time in this wonderful building, every time I'm fascinated by your opportunities, by your library network, and especially your hospitality. So thank you very much for having us here under the EU presidency, Uldis. Galileo Galilei, we cannot teach people anything, we can only help to discover within themselves. So some flashlights at the beginning. First, I guess everyone was terrified just 2.5 years ago when EU Commissioner Vassiliou reported that every 5th young boy or girl and 75 million adults in Europe are lacking in the basic abilities of reading and writing. That means, imagine, whole Germany would be not able to read and write. And don't think that this numbers concentrate on certain European regions. No, it's whole Europe. It was an alarming statistics that shows that there's a large part of society that cannot really participate in this knowledge society in a knowledge-based Europe. Second, perhaps there are other skills that make them for jobs not falling out of the society. But there's another alarming statistics. In the UK, 1 in 5 adults are lacking in basic digital skills. That means managing information, communicating, transacting, problem solving, creating. And these basic digital skills, quotations, are used as a basic standard of literacy. And as Michel Barnier, 2014, said, having published the report about e-skills in Europe, digital competences are as important as reading and writing. How can you work with your computer without the ability of reading and writing? And as we all know, it is much easier to retain information through reading than through listening alone, and easier to make it yourself means by writing. By the way, a former US study from December 2014 shows that the assumption is incorrect that early adopters of new technologies and digital platforms are more interested in e-books than adults. So today's youth still have a large affection for printed material. Are the demands of a knowledge-based society higher than most of the people can keep up with? I think we are living in a new and exciting time of changes, of a mixture of digital storytelling and simultaneously not at the end of the Gutenberg galaxy. There are certainly a lot of risks and chances of reading with digital formats. And I'm convinced that digital media both demands and promotes reading. I think we will come back to that later on the panel. Round about 60% of the activities of young people with digital media go together with reading, because digital reading covers both reading in the digital media and reading with the digital media. That means that literacy is the core competence needed to take part in society, in education, to manage information, and to play an active part in society. This is the point where I would like to quote the key point of the ELINET project, EBLIDA being one of the partners. The low-skilled, especially those with literacy problems, have lost out badly in the recession, and as the digital world becomes ever more pervasive, their exclusion from society risks becoming more deeply embedded. And I'm afraid that without any intensive action plans, the knowledge-based Europe will lose a lot of people in a gap in skills due to supply not meeting demand. To create and maintain equal opportunities, it is necessary to develop and offer low-level programs and consultation, literacy for all kinds of people, in the family, at school, and outside the school in libraries. There are certainly some good examples, such as the actions of the Reading and Writing Foundation, as Jan mentioned, as Bookstart in the UK, and in Germany, Lesestart, 3 milestones for reading, concerning literacy with printed books. But for a digital agenda, we have also to regard and include information literacy. Digital natives have grown up with smartphones and tablets, use them as a matter of course, communicate in social media, for homework, for gaming, for watching films and videos. But the same young people don't know how they can use tablets for efficient information procurement and how they can support themselves in learning. And learning is an individual process, takes place in very different situations and speeds. So books and digital media are ideal tools for learning. But not only young people must know how they can use the different tools efficiently. And as Jan Brackman mentioned, that libraries empower people, libraries and literacy, libraries and information literacy. Libraries are not the only one, but one of the most important gates to a knowledge-based Europe, because with low-level entries open for anyone, because libraries embody all the skills needed for this Europe. Of course, it is a paradoxical situation. Reading and writing are that important and necessary for the digital age, but our abilities cannot, I repeat myself, cannot keep pace with the necessity. So I expect and demand from a digital agenda not only the solution for cross-border activities, a copyright for the digital world, a solution towards geo-blocking, cloud computing for middle-class industries, surely that important that these were the key points of Commissioner Mr. Oettinger in his presentation on Wednesday this week concerning the strategy for a digital single market. But as our colleague Guy Danes from the EBLIDA Executive Committee yesterday mentioned, there are a lot of information to collect from the digital single market strategy, and libraries could find here opportunities to make their voices heard. But for me, it is obviously that a market approach only cannot be the answer to the need for promotion of literacy and skills among the communities, and the important libraries could, should, and are playing in this field. Yes, I expect that people are not only part of the economic focus, but should be, especially in terms of skills and abilities, should be able to contribute to the society, being ready for the future, being part of a knowledge-based Europe. If we don't invest in brains, if we don't invest in libraries, I think, and I'm afraid, that there will be no knowledge-based Europe. Thank you very much.
Now, before we proceed, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Those people sitting there at the back rows, people watching this conference on a web stream can't see you. So if you want, I don't force you. If you want, you can move also forward. And also those who still haven't got their headsets, there will be one speech in Latvian. So maybe not all at once in a rush, but one by one. If you don't have them, they are at the side entrances of the conference room. And finally, yes, I mentioned web stream, so and I also encourage you to tweet using hashtag EBLIDA 2015. If you don't have an internet, I'm afraid it wouldn't be a good idea to say the password of internet network on a web stream, but there are signs outside, so, or ask your colleagues. And with this, we continue the program, and I'm extremely happy that we have two representatives of European Parliament. And unfortunately, Vice President of European Parliament, Sylvie, Guillaume, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, couldn't make it in person to Riga, so you are invited to see her video message.
Libraries are evolving. At the end of the 20th century, they have turned into multimedia libraries. Their collections have been enriched with discs, CDs, DVDs. Computers have been introduced in the reading rooms, after followed by Wi-Fi network for smartphones. The profession of librarian may look calm and relaxed, judging by the silence reigning over the bookshelves. It's not at all. It is in perpetual movement. It follows the rhythm of society and technology evolutions. This profession needs to reinvent itself, let's say, every 10 years, 5 years, even faster. It's up to you to tell us. All sorts of questions were in existence back to the early 2000s. How to digitalize the collections, with which means and resources? What technological choices do we face once the records card put away? How to classify, index, for which algorithm and for how much time? How to lend in the age of digital copying? We witness a dramatic transformation of the environment which goes hand in hand with the transformation of the missions, and in particular the role performed by libraries for their various audiences. When I was a child, we would go to the library to prepare an oral presentation we had to make at school. He or she would point us towards a famous encyclopedia, which doesn't exist anymore anyway, that we would patiently copy by hand. This kind of audience has disappeared because nowadays people use Wikipedia from home. Internet is experienced alone, although it represents a risky learning process. Knowledge, which used to be a precious good, is now widely spread out, with both correct and wrong information, with credulity and suspicion, with conspiracy and plots. Image education, critical mindset, and intellectual rigor have probably not progressed in the same way. Internet enables self-learning, but it is often done in a bad way. Knowledge is about transmission, about interpersonal relationships. Massive open online courses, for instance, represent a fantastic tool to access science and culture. But few people are able to study on their own in front of a screen. To learn and improve people, you, me, need to meet and to share offline, if possible. This is probably one of the major areas of action and evolution of the librarians. How to pass out, convey, correspond in such a moving environment in which you meet people sometimes on Facebook, sometimes at the counter, and in which books are sometimes physical objects and sometimes computer files. How to ensure continuity and smoothness between these physical and digital identities. How to accommodate the various audiences according to the diversity of their expectations. All of this raises numerous questions. They revolve around how to do. On the other hand, the core mission of the library remains the same, and it may well be more obvious than ever. Libraries are links which bring people together, hold culture and values, and build meaning and understanding of the world. What about librarians? They carry out this mission. They are responsible for promoting a certain world order, invisible and essential for our culture at the same time. A little bit like bees are essential for nature. And I'm sure you all know the sentence attributed to Einstein. If the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, man would have no more than 4 years to live.
We don't have, by meaning Latvia, we don't have that many members of European Parliament. It's 7 or 8, I think. 8, yes. So I'm very happy that Miss Inese Vaidere, member of European Parliament from Latvia, agreed to address you today. Please, stage is yours. And you will need headphones now.
Good morning, Honorable Andris Vilks, my dear friend, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's really a great honor to be here and address you in my homeland in Latvia, in my hometown, in Riga. And I'm really honored that I was chosen to represent the point of view of European Parliament. As you know very well, as I was invited to make this presentation, my first question was whether there will be Latvian translation. Why? First, speaking about Europe, building Europe of readers, I think it's a very good way, if it happens here, to talk about this in Latvian. Collect information to read, it's also a very good thing to do this in mother tongue. Of course, multilingualism is an expensive thing, I know, but good things normally are expensive. Secondly, after the 50 years of brutal Russification of my country, when we were not allowed to speak in Latvian in conferences, it's a pleasure to be allowed to speak Latvian, especially if Latvia right now is a country who holds presidency in European Union. Thirdly, if nobody will speak here in Latvian, how you will know how beautiful is our old Baltic language, Latvian. Only 2 languages are remained. Latvian, Lithuanian. Old Preussisch, sorry, doesn't exist anymore. So, and finally, as already many things were told today, at least I will try to transmit this in Latvian, and you will see how beautiful it sounds, the same things in Latvian. So, and now I will switch to official part of my presentation, and you have 5 seconds to put your earphones, and you will now hear how beautiful our language is. Cienījamās dāmas un godātie kungi, kā jau es teicu, man ir tiešām liels gods būt šeit, uzrunāt jūs šajā konferencē. Un, protams, ka šo notikumu ļoti īpašu dara tas, ka mēs uzrunājam viens otru šajā brīdī.
Know that we have been here, we have participated in the support agency for the library, and 80% of the fact that the library is here is thanks to Andris Vilks. Andris Vilks, thank you very much. It is very special. When I was 3 years old, my father returned from Siberia, where he was deported, and the first thing he did was to start teaching reading to me. At the time, my grandma's family, in 1945, were expelled from their apartment. It was done by some Soviet soldiers carrying weapons, and it was a very strong argument. When my mom started working at school, we were given a room next to the school library. And when my dad returned, having returned from Siberia, taught me to read within 1 year, I was able to read at the age of 4, and by the age of 7, I had read the whole school library. And I could say that I have grown together with this library. The librarian was my best friend because I was the only child in the family, and I spent all of my time with my parents and at the school library. And maybe because of that, this aspect of my life, libraries and librarians, is something very special. The librarians' work is very important, especially in the regions. As you heard, they have a tendency to trend to become a cultural information center. I have been cooperating with the Latvian Association for Support of Countryside Librarians for several years. I have also participated in book days in the countryside, giving books as presents. I also invite librarians to the European Parliament in Brussels for a visit. And apparently this wonderful cooperation is the reason why I have been invited to give this speech at this conference. Of course, it's clear that in the 21st century, traditional libraries as an information resource are extending their role. Libraries are becoming, as a provider of progress education and the latest IT. Nowadays, libraries are modern cultural centers where educated and active librarians are organizing informative courses, cultural events, and meetings with creative people. They are also virtual databases, and they also help building democracy and involve the public. They have a huge role in the EU development strategy, Europe 2020. In order to attain the objectives of the European Union, especially in employment, innovation, education, social integration, it is necessary to involve more than 65,000 public libraries. I see how libraries are getting adapted nowadays to the economic and social needs of the society, providing new and exciting services for the visitors. I believe that the European Union should do more in order to appreciate the work by libraries and to promote their development, modernization, both locally and internationally, as well as to involve youth in this work. The government and the culture ministry as well, which is not represented here at the moment, but the finance ministry is represented. I think they should do a lot more because the remuneration librarians receive, as far as I know, does not correspond to their qualifications, and it does not help to promote libraries as cultural centers throughout the country. In order to appreciate better the work of librarians, already in 2013, together with my colleagues at the European Parliament, we developed a declaration on the impact of public libraries in the European community. In this document, we called on the European Commission to recognize the services provided by public libraries and to appreciate it also materially. Libraries are getting involved, and in the future they could get involved even more in the attaining of EU objectives. This role is especially important in the promotion of lifelong learning, development of skills, in the field of employment, especially youth employment and civic, in the building of the civic society, as well as the access to information and communication technologies. Let us start with employment. Approximately approximately 1/10 of European residents are unemployed. This indicator is even more alarming among youth. 1/4 of youth, approximately, have no jobs. In some countries, it is even worse. It is a half of the youth. Many of these young people are not even studying anywhere. At the same time, during the last 5 years, the internet access in households has increased in Europe. About 4/5 of households have the internet connections. It is very important because as we see the lowest computer skills, the groups of people who have the lowest computer skills are elderly people and also some young people who have just finished school. When you look at job advertisements, you see that actually 90% of them require computer knowledge. It is important to write your CV electronically and sometimes to post it on the internet. When doing research on the services of public libraries in 18 European countries, we discovered that 100 million European residents, or 23%, used libraries, and 14 million used it to access the internet. In libraries, it is possible not only to access the internet, but also to receive some consultations on how to make your CV. I have also heard that in the Latvian countryside, in the places where people do not really have their own access to the internet, they can go to the libraries and do that. So I am very proud to say that when I am in Germany, it's so complicated to access the internet there. I am so proud that our situation in Latvia is so good and public libraries are so developed. The program Public Libraries 2020, the date of this program, show that the access that 1.1 million Europeans apply for jobs in these libraries, and many of them 250,000 find jobs. The European Parliament is working on the youth employment initiative. The financing for this is 6 billion euros. And last week we decided to allocate additional means, 1 billion euros, in order to help 650 young people to find jobs faster. This money is used to organize training, consultations, and practice for young people. I think that it is important, alongside with organizing these events, for government agencies and development agencies and NGOs, etc., it is also important to involve public libraries, as well as to increase financing for the libraries. The next point is that libraries play an important role in lifelong learning and development of skills. Teaching library concept as for informal education its role is growing. Approximately 25 million Europeans participate in some courses in libraries. For instance, many elderly people in Latvia have improved their computer skills in library. These skills have have provided access for people to some services that they were unable to access previously, such as paying their bills, filling in some declarations, or inquiring some documents from government agencies. All in all, 74% of residents, European residents, have used libraries to communicate with government agencies, to get involved in public activities, to read or post some opinions on civic or political questions, and to look for information on government activities. The European Parliament is working on e-services and e-solutions, on improving them. And digital skills, the improvement of digital skills, is one of the 7 main strategies. The mission of this idea is to revive the European economy and to help its citizens and companies to benefit from digital technologies. However, it needs to be stressed that improvement of digital skills does not replace public libraries, especially in the regions. It is also necessary to emphasize that libraries play an important role in maintaining the historical and cultural heritage, which is like a bridge between the past and the present. At this time, it's very important to fill in the fracture in the society. It is important to actively work in media involved in cultural processes. In 2007, in the European Parliament, there was an initiative to create a united European digital library called Europeana. For instance, in Latvia, we have created our digital library Letonika and digital cultural map. And I'm very glad that this project has been implemented. Over 24 digital items are accessible on the internet. As you know, a digitalization of such cultural fund not only makes it accessible, but also helps to create it using various applications. And finally, the development of information infrastructure and electronic services have created databases with scientific publications that are easy to be used. As a university teacher, I have always told my students, do not lose your time looking for information on your own. Address librarians at first. I have always been amazed by the fact how much librarians know, how rich their knowledge is. And here a great role is played by highly qualified librarians. When working on scientific publications, I have always had the opportunity to find the latest information in my field. And this kind of help is very highly appreciated. And to sum up, I would like to say just a couple of words, saying that libraries are able to adapt themselves quickly to the needs of the society, which is greatly thanks to the openness of their employees, as well as their ability to motivate, to make people interested and to understand various groups of people and their needs. Also by educating people and helping especially young people to find jobs and study opportunities. Digital libraries have an important role in research and development so that Europe continues developing an economy that is based on on sustainable development, research and innovation. Thank you.
Yes, Vaideres kundzei. He's an author of 9 books on reading, writing, and literature, and his new collection of essays, Changing the Subject, Essays on the Mediated Self, will be published this year. He has reviewed regularly for the New York Times Book Review, the New Republic, Esquire, the Washington Post, and other publications. He has taught writing at Harvard University, Emerson College, and Amherst College, and he is a director of the Graduate Bennington Writing Seminars. And he has been winner of the Citation of Excellence in Reviewing from the National Book Critics Circle and the Spielvogel Diamondstein Award from Penn, member of American Academy of Arts and Sciences, editor of literary journal Agni. Mr. Sven Birkerts, the stage is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. I'll be taking someone else. I'll take a fresh glass. The water is here. Okay. As I will make clear in a moment, I'm also here in another capacity which forms part of my talk this morning, which is that my father was the designer of this building, and so this is also perhaps part of the reason I was invited to come and speak. So I want to thank the organizers of this conference, my EBLIDA-NAPLE hosts, for asking me to offer my thoughts on libraries, books, and reading in what for a long time I thought of as the new millennium, which now just feels like the 21st century. I'll begin with the fact of my standing here in this library, this particular geographical spot, and my recognition of a very relevant set of family circumstances that have everything to do with the subject at hand: books, libraries, the preservation and dissemination of knowledge. So let me start with my own little bit of family history. With my grandmother, my father's mother, Maria Saula Slane, who lived right here in Riga for most of her life, probably no more than 2 kilometers from where I'm standing. She had a long career as an educator and a folklorist, and for a time she and my grandfather, Petrus Birkerts, gathered Latvian tales and riddles, sayings and idioms for preservation, in effect bringing what was still significantly an oral spoken tradition into that of print. My father, Maria's son, Gunnar, grew up in a culture of books and etymologies. My grandmother worked alongside the celebrated linguist Jānis Enzelīns and folklore. And among my father's many early influences were also the well-known tales of the Glass Mountain and the Castle of Light. But those influences would obviously not come to any expressive fruition for many decades, and who could have guessed in what form they would. I visited my grandmother in that apartment only several times, the last being in the early 1980s, shortly before her death. What I remember most clearly, in fact, it has for me become a kind of mental emblem, is the apartment dominated by books, books everywhere, on the shelves, in neat piles, on the piano, on the floor. It was a familiar and reassuring sight for me, for at that point in my life, I was myself living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and working in bookstores and collecting books. I don't want to linger much longer on these family associations except to remark on one fascinating and suggestive convergence, which is that my father, who had grown up in this bookish saturation, took a different path toward architecture and design, toward the outward material expression of buildings rather than the interior expressions of language and literature. And in doing so, he pledged himself to the concrete changing pressures of the modern age, which included the transformations brought about by computerization. His awareness of contemporary and pending needs is clearly reflected, I think, in the design of this library, which functions not just as a traditional archival storage facility, but also accommodates current technological needs and anticipates those of the future as well. The convergence I'm talking about is that of eras and influences. It is the arresting fact that the design conception of this state-of-the-art building has its imaginative roots back in the folklore culture drawn from childhood reading of those tales, which were themselves excavated, like any nation's founding literature, from what had survived for centuries in a spoken tradition. So I feel I'm standing at a literal axis point, a place where the stages of evolution are laid one on top of the other, spoken, written, and digital. And so I take this layering as a platform for a few reflections on the idea of the library itself as we make the transit from one paradigm to another. To begin with, though the world of information is still significantly book and paper-based and will be for some time, with paper still playing a vital part in the ecology of information, so that things that are deemed of a certain importance or lastingness continue to have a paper existence, while other kinds of information have their circuit life. Paper is both a practical medium, for we see already how quickly new technologies become improved upon and outmoded, and an increasingly symbolic validation. One would not dream of having a contract, say, that existed only in digital form. But of course, there's now an enormous, ever-expanding cloud atmosphere of electronic information which we all partake in and which engulfs us at every turn. And one obvious and central question has to do with the library's role in curating, in determining orders of value, and enabling access to materials which are not available on paper, but which do, as information, come under the library's jurisdiction. A few years ago, we heard a great deal about atoms and bits. That was shorthand differentiation between what existed as a material substance, as thing, the atom, and what existed as an insubstantial digital information, coded strings of ones and zeros that passed through the ether but were not there to actually be touched. The library, from the time of Alexandria on, right up to the end of this last century, was almost strictly of the atom. It was about physical collection, preservation, dissemination, and that is the conception that we still largely keep, even as the information ratio of atoms to bits is swinging radically toward the bit. Our traditions and myths continue to constrain our imaginations. As we all know, the library of the 21st century has significantly changed its way of doing things, and thus necessarily its conception as well. The institution formerly committed to the atom is ever increasingly serving the bit. But of course that's too simple, for both atom and bit are simply media for the conveyance of intellectual and expressive content. And it is that content that the library is now, as always throughout its history, pledged to serve and preserve and conserve. Though its etymological root is liber, or alternatively biblion, for book, in fact, its almost priestly function is the conservation of content. The implications of this are worth some contemplation. Though the library has always and will always, so long as those atom-based entities exist, served the book, one of its profoundest roles is to enable and safeguard the culture of reading, which, as everyone knows, is changing at a dramatic rate. And to think toward the future of the library, we also need to think in terms of the future of reading. A few weeks ago, I saw a short interview on television with the writer Philip Roth, who pulled me upright in my seat by announcing without any qualification that literary reading was nearly extinct. There are too many screens, he said. We live among screens and use them all day long, and we have destroyed the concentration, the capacity for attention that is essential to one kind of book culture, literary book culture. Though I've been thinking and writing about this very thing for several decades now, I was nevertheless disturbed by Roth's words of confirmation. In fact, my reaction made me see the depth of my investment in the old paradigm, the view of things I grew up with. Roth is right, I thought. I considered the reading habits of my students, my children and their friends, and I considered my own reading habits, how much they have changed in the last decade or so. Changed for the very reason Philip Roth gave. Granted, he addressed himself to literary reading, the consumption of serious novels and poetry. But his assessment applies across the board for several reasons. One, the erosion of a kind of focused, single-track attention is not confined to literary reading, it's universal. I refer to it as distraction. We live in an age of distraction, and things are not about to reverse course back towards some monastic absorption. But also, the second reason, and doubtless there are many other reasons too, is that reading, or more broadly, the taking in and processing of information, is changing in ways that we could not have imagined a few decades ago. The developments of various technologies and the integration and compounding of these developments has produced a whole new set of behaviors. Whether we call them collectively reading or not is beside the point. They are increasingly what is, and therefore they are of the highest relevance. These behaviors, conditioned by our screen technologies, are superficial and lateral as opposed to immersive, discontinuous as opposed to one track. And they bring together information that is not only language-based, but also visual and audio. They are something new under the sun. They don't propose or require attention of the old kind, but rather compel an action of skimming and linking and targeting of searches. They do not, by and large, require the prior building of contexts. They are more akin to what anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss called bricolage, the solving of problems by taking and adapting what is to hand. Of course, I'm making a broad and non-binding set of generalizations here. Those of us over, say, the age of 50, more invested in the old paradigm, might be skeptical. But let's think about what I'm saying in the light of generations. Let's think about the nature and role of the library of the future in the light of how several generations of the young and near young navigate their information environment day in and out. For starters, they are completely habituated to the powerful devices they and we all carry as an appendage, a prosthesis. The telephone used for voice, but even more for sending and receiving texts, for offering countless apps, for listening to music, watching video, making internet searches, for finding dating partners, hooking up, etc. You cannot look around you in any urban center and not see it. Everyone, day in and out, is fixated on the little lit rectangle in front of their face. And this is just a single instance, one I offer to suggest the kind of conditioning that is going on. If we look to the computers themselves, to what it is that the younger users, and to be fair, all of us do when they are engaged in the tasks of information, study, research, and writing, we find that the old one-track patterns are nearly non-existent. Our information users are moving, often with great agility, in complex lateral formations, pursuing keywords, tapping links, bookmarking essential data. They are clicking over to YouTube, to Wikipedia, to Google Images, accessing the dictionary function as needed. They will pause to email, to game, to visit Facebook. This is how it is, and do we think they will change and go back to older ways of doing things? Not likely. Which raises an interesting set of questions about the nature and importance of context, and also about the traditional organizational paradigm of the library and how it might feel the pressures of these new cognitive styles. Libraries have always represented the classification and organization of knowledge with systems created to facilitate the search for information. They've been vital centers of storage, archiving, preserving, and curating. The storage capacities of the microchip have changed the game, as have the algorithms of the internet search. The creation of unthinkingly vast databases, rich with scanned materials, accessible instantaneously via keystroke, have put serious pressure on what had always been the incontestable authority of any library, its offer of holdings and access. Indeed, it could be argued that the system that is the library is not so much aided as displaced by the system that is the computer, at least so far as a great many potential users are concerned. And yet, in a world of distributed information accessed by tools of singular power and capacity, the importance of the library remains, though it might be fair to ask whether the nature of that importance might not be changing, acquiring a greater symbolic power even as certain traditional functions are being usurped, because certain traditional functions are being usurped. I will not try to account for the many concrete ways in which libraries, themselves powered by computers and staffed by people savvy about the nature and uses of information, will adapt to changing conditions. You know that far better than I do. I have no doubt but that the layered saturations of information in all media across many platforms will require the contextualizing know-how of librarians who have understood in advance of the rest of us that the art of getting answers requires knowing how to ask questions, and that this knowing requires the vast expertise and insight that are the very qualities threatened by our current bewitchment with our digital appliances. This will all come clear if it has not started to already, and the opportunities for usefulness have never been greater. Libraries, while themselves changing in many ways, will be the institutions that in a literal as well as symbolic way define the landscape of change, once it is clear that their function has less to do with books per se than with information. I want to end by taking these two words I just used, landscape and symbolic, to suggest a larger and more abstract way to consider all that I've been talking about. I'd like to read a very short poem by Wallace Stevens, his Anecdote of the Jar, and to have us think of it as an emblem. Here's the poem. I placed a jar in Tennessee, and round it was upon a hill. It made the slovenly wilderness surround that hill. The wilderness rose up to it and sprawled around it, no longer wild. The jar was round upon the ground and tall and of a port in air. It took dominion everywhere. The jar was gray and bare. It did not give of bird or bush like nothing else in Tennessee. Maybe you can see the analogy I'm trying to make. Stevens' wilderness is the fully saturated information environment, a chaos of signals such as we can scarcely imagine. Yet it is more and more our environment, carrying all the psychological danger that comes with the loss of context. I don't mean concrete danger, but rather the danger of a loss of center, of diffused purpose, of fragmented identity. I mean this in terms of the individual, but I also mean it in terms of society at large, for we are fast becoming an uncentered wilderness of signals and noise, noise being all that free-floating data that signifies nothing. The jar in the poem, the organizing vessel, it is thing, but it is also more idea than thing. It is that toward which everything tends. The jar, almost like the painter's vanishing point, confers center and focus. It is the literal and also the symbolic library. That concrete institution made of atoms, an orienting ideal or concept made of bits. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. That concrete institution made of atoms, an orienting ideal or concept made of bits. I come back to this place where I'm standing, from which I've been reflecting on an imagined future, even as I began by invoking the personal historical circumstances that make my standing here feel so profound to me. I register it all as a complex continuity, one that, as I sketched in the beginning, looks all the way back to the oral folk tradition and all the way forward to a hyper-saturated multimedia future. However we feature these transformations, we should not forget that at their center, always embodying their pressures and promises, is the individual, that which information and knowledge ultimately serve. And I want to thank you again for inviting me here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Böttger, and I think we have all earned now a rather short coffee break. I expect you to be back by more or less this time you see on the screen. I hope that the web viewers also have a coffee machine and or fridge somewhere nearby. So see you back here in 15-20 minutes. Thank you.